Hey everybody, this is Christina. Just so everyone knows, I also go by my official first name is Maria, but I go by my middle name Christina, so I apologize. Sometimes I alternate between the two. Um, hey, hope everyone's having a great night. So, the article that was given to me to review is titled Naturalizing Negativity: How Journalism Textbooks Justify Crime, Conflict, and Bad News. And the article was written by Perry Parks. The institutional affiliation is the School of Journalism, and this is at Michigan State University in East Lansing, Michigan. So, the thesis of this article, the abstract, does a really good job of encapsulating the thesis. I'm gonna read the thesis directly from the article and then discuss a little bit. So this is from the thesis here. Excuse me, the abstract. This critical analysis of U.S. journalism textbooks from 1894 to 2016 shows how texts across decades have reconstructed a discourse of damage through news values, emphasizing and rationalizing conflict and bad news. Findings are reported in the context of literature suggesting that negative news values foster a distorted sense of social relations, increase fear, and depress civic participation. Literature also indicates that non journalists often view news through less conflict oriented and more value laden frames, suggesting that journalistic values are not natural or inevitable but subject to change. The discourse in journalism textbooks can be a key site for understanding and influencing journalism culture. Constructive alternatives to the dominant discourse are suggested. Yes, so that was the abstract from this article. To break it down, the author conducts a longitudinal study, an interpretive longitudinal study, evaluating texts, journalistic textbooks, and articles over decades of time, and taking note that the focus has been so much on conflict, disaster, and war, and very negative topics, and that the journalists are focusing on this very subject when other methods of journalistic effort could be made. And then it also says that constant viewing of this type of news reporting is has a very negative psychological effect on the viewers, and it increases fear and anger and a feeling of feelings of needing to protect oneself. And so this author is uh, basically arguing that because the focus of the journalist the past decades has been on this like negative mindset, that it's been negatively affecting how we perceive the world, our actual level of like involvement and participation in that, like how humans feel really powerless against the system and everything. So this is a really interesting article, and I'm really glad that this one was given to me. So the relationship between the theory and method in this article. So the author delves into he uses for his research he uses mainly books, textbooks, to for his methods to do the study, but the theories that he explains are also from the books and these authors and other journalists. So the theory and the method to me seem really like interconnected, which is interesting. So which makes sense to me because this is a critical paper analysis, and he uses an interpretive style longitudinal study, so that makes sense. Um, what theoretical concepts does the author use? I'm gonna go into this text in here, into the article a little bit. So on page 76, quote, the purpose of the study is to foreground the discursive environment that fosters such a limited scope of newsworthiness. I do so by analyzing the discourse of conflict, crime, and negative news in a key site of journalism's body of knowledge, Miranda, 1992. Uh, so his theoretical concepts. First, he discusses the textbooks. It's a subtitle header in there. Textbook news values, and he's saying how the books that he relied on for the study do have high journalistic value, and that he also, quote, textbooks are an important site of knowledge and a window into prevailing discourses for a given discipline. And the second part, he talks about negativity in the news. Quote, critical consensus indicates the news media disproportionately highlight the negative side of humanity, nature, and events, often conjuring conflict if it is not already present. And he briefly mentions constructive journalism, but that is discussed more in the conclusion. And I want to bring that up as a key term that I learned. And the author highlights just the theories and opinions of other journalists. And on page 78, quote, journalists' predilection for the negative is justified and naturalized in part through what Harold Laswell called the, quote, surveillance function of the mass media. The argument goes that human beings have an instinctive tendency to surveil their environment for potential threats, and that they direct disproportionate attention to information that may signal danger, which helps explain why so much news involves misfortune, disaster, or deviance. So what he's saying is that our primary instinct as humans is to detect, be vigilant for signs of danger in order for our survival. And he's saying that this was an original thing to help us, but now it's hurting us with this relation to mass media and then what the journalists are putting out for people to absorb. And he also says, quote, humans aren't physiologically adept at distinguishing between a real and present danger and any virtual distant danger that happens to cross their news feeds. So the relationship with the internet and surveillance function and being primed for negative news, all that affects the mind. And some key terms that I learned while reading the article, one of them is constructive journalism. The definition is in the conclusion. Quote, while constructive journalism can be traced to principles found in innovations such as community, civic, citizen solutions, and positive journalism, McIntyre argues it is, quote, distinct in its intentions, methods, training, and commitment to journalism's core functions. So, constructive journalism, it's, in simpler terms, it's like a solutions-based form of journalism where instead of focusing on the negative of a situation, the journalists specifically look at solutions-based data, stories, interviews, just any information that they're looking that will help construct like progression and solutions rather than ruminating on the negativity that people are often like dumped with every day by watching the local news, for example. And the other term that I liked that I just highlighted earlier, it was, the other one I wanted to discuss is mean world syndrome, which, quote, this is on page 78 as well, a dimension of cultivation theory which has found that long-term exposure to television in which frequent violence is virtually inescapable tends to cultivate the image of a relatively mean and dangerous world. Romer, Jameson, and Ede found that watching local TV news in particular heightened viewers' fears of crime, controlling for other factors, and reading a newspaper did not. So there's something specific with visually watching. Excuse me. So based on my notes, provide a walkthrough of the key points of the article. So, of course, there's the title, there's the article history. The article was received June 2018, and it was accepted on September 28th of 2018, that same year. And so I already read the abstract, and then there are the first few sections are the theories that the author discusses. So it's the textbook news values, negativity in the news. And then he goes into the next section, which is the method. So he describes a longitudinal interpretive study analysis. So he selected, quote, textbooks were selected based on availability following a hybrid of sampling methods used by previous authors analyzing textbooks for a variety of periods encompassed in the study, grounded by Mirando's exhaustive review of reporting and writing textbooks from the mid 19th century through 1988. So the author goes pretty far back, and he goes pretty far back for the identifying the textbooks. And he does another method as well. For textbooks published after 1990, quote, I use the list developed by Hopper and Huxford, who analyzed contemporary texts suggested by publishers. Combined methods produced a bibliography of 104 volumes. The sample totaled 75 volumes. And he describes how he actually did the process of reading the textbooks as well. Procedurally, he says. He read the book from beginning to end, and he paid attention to, quote, implicit or explicit, how the authors defined and described what topics should be focused on for good journalism. And he found that more often than not, they were pushing the theme of like reporting on conflict and war and all of these topics that we were discussing. And then he goes through the results, which really confirm what he had been discussing in the theories, which doesn't really surprise me, seeing as this is a critical review and he did an interpretive study. The conclusion provided a lot of information, and overall, I found this article really intriguing. There are definitely a couple challenges. There are a lot of segments to it. It's definitely something that doing it again, I did the notes. I would physically just take my time with it a little bit more. That's what I would do. But I'm really happy with the article, and I'm really glad that I read this. So thanks everybody. Thank you for listening, and I'll be watching everybody else's videos as well. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.